let's go to the final part here about the Durham investigation. This came out a little bit later in the day. I had the time to read as much as I could. This thing is 300 pages. So I read the executive summary and some of the key sections, and we pulled out what we thought were the most important takeaways from the Durham Report. For those who don't remember, the Durham Report was the report to oversee the Mueller report, and which was then a response to the Crossfire Hurricane investigation.
Investigate the investigators.
Investigating the investigators who are the investigators of the president. And I know that this can just seem absolutely maddening. Let's just start with the very basics of it all comes back to Russiagate. What was Russiagate? It has now become an all-encompassing term. I think at its core, it was this. Donald Trump and the Trump campaign, members of the Trump campaign, conspired with the Russian government, both through monetary and political purposes, to damage the Hillary Clinton campaign. That included an allegation that they were helping coordinate WikiLeaks, not true. That they were helping coordinate other leaks, not true. That they were helping coordinate Facebook ads to help sway the election, also not true. But that was it at its core. And it had, different sub-elements, like the Steele dossier, like Alpha Bank, like all of these other allegations that have since all been debunked. We know now today that not one of those things happens to be true. But the investigation as to how said investigation was even sparked by the FBI, how tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer resources were spent by the FBI, the premier law enforcement organization, to investigate and run these things down, how the American people were subjected to this story for, I would say 3 straight years of nonstop news coverage. And it's one of the biggest screw-ups by media and also by law enforcement, basically since Iraq WMD, as Matt Taibbi so eloquently wrote at the time. Now, the roots of this investigation go very, very deep, and that was arguably one of the biggest stories from the Durham Report. Let's put this up there on the screen, please. According to the report, the plan by Hillary Clinton and the Clinton campaign to hire a law firm to fund the Steele dossier and to shop it around town to get media outlets to report on it, linking Trump to Russia, was briefed in August of 2016 by then CIA Director John Brennan to President Obama, Vice President Biden, AG Loretta Lynch, and FBI Director Comey. Now, this particular subplot of Russiagate, for those of the uninitiated, is actually called Obamagate. Yes, this just shows you how long we've been covering this. So this goes to the initial Trump allegation that President Obama, his lackeys in the White House and others were briefed on said dossier and did their best to do two things. A, to maintain knowledge of the investigation, to make sure that the FBI actually launched an investigation into this. B, they knew that it politically would have been beneficial to the Hillary Clinton campaign. And then finally, C, is that they did their best, Krystal, at the time to maintain not only the investigation, but also elements and other damaging information about the Trump and the incoming Trump administration, why quote unquote, spreading it around government, so enabling it to leak when the Trump people came into office. I think that that is a tremendously significant and important point because it shows that going back to the Obama White House and the involvement of the CIA director then, John Brennan, his eventual departure of the CIA to MSNBC, and also unquestionably a part of the leaks to the press around Russiagate, he was intimately familiar with this plan from the very, very beginning, and very likely sparked some of the initial interest in this, along with Clapper, who also was then working for CNN.
So part of what this report outlines, as reflected in what we just had up on the screen, is that there were separate allegations about both of these campaigns with regards to Russia.
Yeah.
So there was the, Steele dossier, Russian collusion situation with Trump. That was one unconfirmed allegation that was out there. And there was also an unconfirmed allegation out there about Hillary Clinton, that one of her foreign policy advisors had come up with a plot, which was approved by Hillary herself. Again, these were all allegations, unconfirmed, that they were going to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security services. So both of these campaigns had potential sort of like Russian plots that had been alleged against them. And part of what the Durham Report concludes is that they handled those two separate claims very differently. In the Clinton instance, they basically dismissed it and they didn't launch a major investigation into it. And in the Trump instance, they did. And what the Durham Report asserts is that some of the people who were involved in opening the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, including Peter Strzok and some of these other names that, again, go back years now, that they had a bias against Trump. And that was part of why they decided to take this Steele dossier, which we all know now, almost all of it was bullshit, especially the most salacious claims were complete nonsense, decided to take this uncorroborated report and use it as the basis to launch this investigation. So that was part of what was important to show here, is that the two candidates were treated differently. And then one other piece, just before you go on to some of the other revelations here, that I think it's really important to keep in mind as we're going through all of this and why this still matters, unfortunately, so many years later, is this has screwed up our whole view of Russia. I mean, this is still reverberating in terms of the Ukraine war and how we're approaching and how Americans are thinking about all of these things. I mean, it just never ends in terms of the impact that this all had on the American public. And if you're a faithful MSNBC viewer, if you heard the way we were talking about this and that this was all debunked, your mind would be blown because you've never heard that on their airwaves, even though they spend more than any other network years and years and years building this out and milking it for ratings night after night after night, led by their top performer in talent, Rachel Maddow. So the other piece of this, of why this still matters, is unlike Iraq WMD, which eventually the media all admitted, oops, our bad, we got it wrong, and there's a general public acceptance and acknowledgement of that, there are vast swaths of mainstream media viewers and audience and readers who have no idea how wrong these outlets got things.
Compare Obama's response to Crimea to Joe Biden's response to Ukraine. And I'm not saying those are one-to-one, but there is no way that some of the madness going on in terms of U.S. support for Ukraine happens today without Russiagate. It has massive, and when the historians go back 100 years from now, it's like going back and looking at war fever in 1912 in Britain and in Germany, and being like, it's obvious something's about to go down. And at that time, they didn't really know it. It seemed normal. It was in the air. Well, I'm gonna call it in the living through the time that this unquestionably had a massive impact on U.S. history, on the war in Ukraine, and how the U.S. public viewed Russia. Let's go to the next part here. This is very important. From the Durham investigation, they conclude that the Steele dossier, the infamous, quote, P-tape claim, which was in the dossier, was not only an obvious lie, but whose provenance was nonsense and fabricated in its entirety by a Northern Virginia Democratic operative named Charles Dolan, who had ties to Russian businesses and lobbying organizations, who levied said ties by planting it in the Steele dossier before then peddling it to media outlets before and after the Trump victory in 2016. And then finally, actually, probably most importantly from a national security perspective, put this up there on the screen, they showed that the Steele dossier was included in the illegal Carter Page FISA warrant, that the report shows the FISA applications included items from the unproven Steele dossier were included directly in said FISA application, where they took unverified information peddled by the Clinton campaign and used it as a pretext to spy on an American citizen. So you put all this together, and what you find is an incredibly damaging report for the FBI. I was actually a little bit miffed by the Durham report because in his executive summary, he damns the FBI. He says that they opened this investigation with no evidence whatsoever that any of it was true. They spent so many resources on running down these BS claims, obviously for political purposes. But in it, he doesn't have any recommendations for new procedures.
Right.
In this summary,
that was kind of astonishing,
he just goes,
too.
I have no recommendations, just simply follow the law. I'm like, well, clearly the law's not working because Peter Strzok is a hero. Andrew McCabe is on CNN, he was literally fired for not doing his job properly. The other guy went to go work for Twitter and got fired by Elon to cover up, because he was covering up his own Twitter files nonsense. Not what James Comey is a multimillionaire living here in Northern Virginia. What's happening? Clearly, you can't just have law enforcement officials who don't properly enforce the law or do investigations correctly and suffer no consequences.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm losing my mind reading this report.
Yeah, I mean, most of the prosecutions, there were 3 separate attempted prosecutions that came out of this. Only one of them resulted in a conviction. The other 2 resulted in acquittals. So the prosecutions that came out of this ended up, not going very far themselves. And I found that part too a little perplexing, frankly, because you have this whole report that lays out, I think what
300 pages. Yeah.
anyone would have to look at this and say, okay, this illustrates some real problems within the FBI. And then it's like, all right, so what do we do about it? And he's just like, yeah, just do better next time. It's like that's
no.
not going to happen.
It's like, this whole thing is broken.
Right?
Yeah.
What is the root cause? Like, how do we get to this place?
Yeah.
What's the root cause? How do you change that? And he had nothing for you on that front. So it was disappointing in that regard for sure, because what you would like to see is some sort of reform that's going to give people confidence that, the next time there's this big investigation, big, incredibly politically charged investigation, which the FBI has now bungled a few of these, that things are going to unfold differently. And instead it's just like, just do a little better next time, guys. We got confidence that it's going to be all good.
It's so dumb.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.